Number 1.
The paramedics had seen a lot of corpses, but never one quite like this. Robert Wone's chest was carved open by 3 deep stab wounds. A bloodied knife lay on a side table. But the high-powered Washington lawyer's body was laid out neatly on a bed with his arms at his side. The bedding was unruffled and folded neatly at an angle. There was no sign of a struggle, none of the defensive wounds that might be expected on a man fighting for his life. Strangest of all, there was almost no blood. Later, the pathologist found something even more unusual. 7 tiny needle pricks to Wone's body that could not be explained by his wife or doctor. That was 4 years ago. The police came to a theory over the murder almost immediately, albeit one they have been accused of reaching out of prejudice. But only now is anyone on trial, and not for the killing itself. Tomorrow, a judge will deliver her verdict on 3 men, one a close friend of Wone since college, and his 2 partners in a $1 million house in the lively DuPont Circle neighborhood, who are accused of covering up murder. It's a trial and a mystery that has gripped Washington in recent weeks, even generating a website, Who Murdered Robert Wone, run by neighbors of the accused men that has tried to get to the bottom of the killing. The case stretches back to a humid summer evening in 2006 when Wone, who was 32 at the time of his death, had to work unusually late in Washington and decided to stay overnight with his old college friend Joseph Price rather than travel home late at night to his wife, Kathy, in Virginia. Wone and Price, 39, were both high-powered lawyers who attended a prestigious Virginia college. In the following years, Price entered a civil partnership with Victor Zaborski, 44. A third man, Dylan Ward, 40, later moved in with them. They told the police they lived in the house in a 3-way committed relationship. Wone arrived at the house at about 10:30 p.m., had a glass of water as he chatted to Price and Ward in the kitchen and went to his bedroom. Less than 90 minutes later, Zaborski called the emergency services. "We had someone in our house, evidently, and they stabbed somebody," he told the 911 operator. She asked, "Are they bleeding?" "See someone bleeding?" "Yes," said Zaborski. "Someone is bleeding in our house." When the police arrived, they were met by the 3 residents of the house, who appeared to be freshly showered, all wearing white bathrobes. The paramedics arrived too. One of them, Jeff Baker, looked at the body and found what he saw. It looked like his abdomen had been wiped, kind of like when you wash a window, he said. According to court papers, a second paramedic described the scene as very wrong. She saw a large hole in the victim's chest, big enough to fit your finger into, but there was no blood whatsoever on the victim, on the floor, or anywhere in the room, legal papers said. To the paramedic it appeared that Wone had been stabbed, showered, redressed, and placed in the bed. The police searched the house and turned up an assortment of unusual sex toys that looked to the detectives more like medieval torture instruments. The police quickly developed a theory. 3 gay men. Sadomasochistic sex toys. An evident attempt to clean up the crime scene. At first they believed Wone was involved in a sex game that got out of control. But they came to be convinced that Wone was not gay or bisexual, and that whatever had happened to him was against his will. Yet there was no evidence of a struggle. Then the pathologist's report came in with the evidence of needle marks to Wone's neck, chest, foot, and hand. The police concluded that Wone had been subdued with a paralyzing drug, but nothing was detected in his blood. The pathologist's report also said that blood vessels in Wone's eye had burst, an indicator of suffocation. The victim was found wearing a guard in his mouth to prevent him from grinding his teeth, suggesting he was preparing to go to sleep when he was attacked. As he interrogated Price, Detective Daniel Wagner pressed for an explanation. "I got 3 homosexuals in the house and I got 1 straight guy. What's he doing over there? What's he doing over there?" Wagner asks, according to a police transcript. "You are coming to Jesus tonight, that's what is going on tonight." Prosecutors told the court that the 3 men held off on calling the police, while they cleaned up and tampered with the scene of the crime. They are alleged to have mopped up the large pools of blood that poured from Wone, disposed of the knife used to kill him, and replaced it with another to mislead detectives, and rearranged the crime scene. They are also accused of delaying the call to the emergency services. Neighbors who heard a scream assumed to be Wone's about 20 minutes before Zaborski dialed 911. But defense lawyers say the police's theory is based on prejudice about other people's lifestyles. The three accused have stuck solidly to a single version of events, that someone broke into the house and killed Wone for no apparent reason. There are certainly weaknesses in the prosecution case. For a start, a lot would have happened in the less than a 90-minute window between Wone's arrival and the 911 call, including a bloody murder and a complete clean-up of the scene. Yet the defendant's version of events would mean that a total stranger had climbed a 7-foot wall, a flight of stairs, bypassed one bedroom to enter Wone's room, killed him, and then left without taking any of the electronics, cash, wallets or other valuables lying around the house. The explanation came under further scrutiny when a police examination of the route the intruder was supposed to have taken revealed that cobwebs and dust were undisturbed. In the midst of the trial, the prosecution added an additional twist. It speculated in court that a fourth man, Price's younger brother, Michael, may have been the killer, but admitted it had no evidence to back up the claim. The prosecutor, Glenn Kirshner, said the defendants know the truth, but they have acted in unison to protect the family. Their three-person relationship formed the bedrock for the conspiracy, he said. The defendants really worked hard and fast to cover this up. One of the defense lawyers, David Schertler, in closing arguments, characterized the government's case as assumptions, speculations and innuendo. They cannot prove the true circumstances of what happened August 2, 2006, he said. If you don't know who did what, you can't prove the true circumstances of what happened to Robert Wone. But one of the prosecutors, Rachel Carlson-Lieber, responded, "We don't know what happened to Robert Wone that night of August 2, 2006. They did and they lied," she began. Kathy Wone doesn't know. They do and they lied. Robert Wone's parents don't know what happened to their son that night. They do and they lied. The three, who opted for trial by judge rather than a jury, face decades in prison if convicted. But that won't answer the question of who murdered Robert Wone.
Number 2.
At approximately 4 a.m. on April 18, 2016, 45-year-old Terry Missy Bevers arrived at the Creekside Church of Christ in Midlothian, Texas. As True Crime Edition reported in 2022, Bevers was preparing one of the church's classrooms for an early morning gladiator boot camp class, which she taught to members of the community. When her students arrived just 1 hour later, they made an alarming discovery. The students found Bevers unresponsive, and she appeared to have been physically assaulted. In addition to blunt force trauma to the head, Bevers had multiple wounds in her chest. Bevers' students called 911, and paramedics rushed to the scene. However, it was simply too late. Bevers was pronounced dead at the scene. As the Dallas Observer and other outlets would later note, it was clear to authorities that Bevers had been murdered, though at first, they were unsure who killed her or what the motive could have been. Authorities initially suspected Bevers was killed during an attempted robbery, but church administrators confirmed nothing was missing from the premises. It was also determined that none of Bevers' belongings, including her wedding ring, was stolen. A later search of the building revealed several windows were broken. According to True Crime Edition, authorities believe the suspect entered the building through a back door, which had signs of forced entry. Law enforcement officials were further assisted by security footage, which captured images of the assailant inside the church at the time Bevers was killed. The person, who was wearing what appeared to be full police tactical gear and had their face covered, pictured above, stumped authorities. Officials also weren't able to determine their gender. However, per the Dallas Observer, they were able to parse key details. The possible assailant's range of height, clocking it between 5'2" and 5'7", and the person's unique gait. Per the Observer, the unknown subject walked with a pronounced limp with their feet pointing outward. But their most chilling observation was this. The unknown subject was seen in the footage carrying what was likely a hammer. As True Crime Edition noted in 2022, the Midlothian Police Department released surveillance footage soon into the investigation, in the hopes that someone would recognize the assailant. Later on, law enforcement also discovered surveillance footage of a vehicle believed to be connected to Missy Bevers' murder. In the hours before she was killed, a person was recorded slowly driving through a nearby parking lot. CBS News reported in 2021 that the vehicle, which is believed to be a 2010 to 2012 Nissan Altima or Infiniti G37, stopped to park before eventually leaving. Per True Crime Edition, authorities also received tips that a dark-colored SUV was seen leaving the church parking lot at approximately 4:30 a.m. Unfortunately, the owner of the car did not come forward after the video's release. During the investigation, True Crime Edition reported in 2022 that detectives questioned Missy Bevers' husband, Brandon Bevers. Although he had an alibi, authorities hoped he could offer possible insight into the homicide. During his interview with police, Brandon said he couldn't think of anyone who would have wanted to harm his wife. He also told detectives that he and Missy had a happy marriage, though the story wasn't as simple as that. Further investigation revealed Brandon and Missy were having financial and personal problems, including infidelity. Despite this, Brandon was ruled out as a suspect. Per True Crime Edition, authorities were also suspicious of Brandon's father, Randy. In the weeks following the murder, Randy took a blood-soaked shirt to a local dry cleaner, though he insisted the blood was from breaking up a dog fight. Nevertheless, the dry cleaner contacted authorities after hearing about Missy's murder on the news. Authorities issued a warrant for the shirt, which was then sent to be tested by forensic analysts. Despite the fact that the shirt had been washed before they received it, the blood was testable, and testing eventually confirmed it had come from a dog, just as Randy said. Authorities also noted Randy matched the general height and weight of the person in the church's surveillance footage, and also walked with a limp. However, he had a solid alibi for the morning of Missy's murder. He was in California at the time. Over the course of the investigation, authorities also examined Missy Bevers' electronic devices and social media accounts. As reported by the Dallas Morning News in 2016, Bevers was active on the professional social networking site LinkedIn. Authorities learned Bevers had been in communication with one man in particular between January 2016 and the day of her death. In those 3 months, authorities said the conversation between the two had turned flirtatious and familiar. Law enforcement officials contacted the man, who admitted having an online friendship with Bevers. However, he was never named as a suspect. According to the true crime blog Chilling Crimes, Bevers also received what she told friends was a creepy and strange message from a man she did not know. The message, which was also sent via LinkedIn, was received 3 days before she was killed. As of this writing, it is unknown whether authorities ever identified the sender or whether he is considered a person of interest or a suspect. Based on a tip received about the SUV seen leaving the church parking lot, authorities identified Bobby Wayne Henry as a person of interest. According to the true crime blog Hunt a Killer, which cited discussions and theories posited by Reddit internet sleuths, Henry was a former police officer who admittedly still owned the tactical gear he was issued when he worked for the police force. He also drove a dark-colored SUV and walked with a pronounced limp. Per True Crime Edition, Henry was dismissed from the police department when he was charged with sexual assault in 2017. Despite that charge, and another charge related to possession of child pornography, Henry was employed part-time as a security guard. According to Hunt a Killer, there were a number of concerns that led authorities to take a closer look at Henry and his possible involvement in Missy Bevers' murder. However, he was several inches taller than the person seen in the church's surveillance footage and was ultimately eliminated as a suspect. If you or anyone you know has been a victim of sexual assault, help is available. Visit the Rape, Abuse and Incest National Network website or contact RAIN's National Helpline at 1-800-656-HOPE 4673. If you or someone you know may be the victim of child abuse, please contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD, 1-800-422-4453, or contact their live chat services. In the years since Missy Bevers' 2016 murder, as of this report, investigators have not made an arrest or identified a suspect in the homicide case. Even so, there are numerous theories as to who may have killed the former fitness instructor, including those already cleared by Texas police. Although they have all been ruled out, some people believe either Brandon or Randy Bevers was involved. Others still point to Bobby Wayne Henry as the most likely suspect. In their 2020 write-up of the case, Chilling Crimes listed some theories which suggest Bevers' murder was connected to someone either she or her husband was involved with. They also pointed out how easy it would be for her killer to trace her day-to-day movements, as she was active on social media and widely advertise her gladiator boot camp classes. Bevers' activities and location were readily available. CBS News reports authorities have received more than 3,000 tips. Unfortunately, they have not received enough information to make an arrest, and authorities still have not established the identity of the person seen in the church surveillance video. But even though Bevers' murder has remained unsolved for 6 years running, law enforcement officials have not deemed the case cold, and the investigation is currently active.
Number 3.
The city of San Francisco was 30 minutes late when it pulled out of Carlin, Nevada on the evening of August 12, 1939. The train was America's most luxurious streamliner, launched the year before to transport guests between Chicago and Oakland. It cost $2 million to build and was lush with Kelly green seats and signage printed in metallic copper ink. The windows had been specially tinted by Polaroid to filter glare. Its top-of-the-line horsepower cut 19 hours from the Midwest to West Coast trip. Engineer Ed Heckox was keenly aware the train was behind schedule, but he knew the area well. He'd been transporting passengers through the West since he was a stagecoach driver in the 1880s. This long, empty stretch of Nevada would give him plenty of space to make up time. He pushed the city of San Francisco to 90 miles per hour. Dinner service had just wrapped up in the restaurant car, and many passengers were enjoying post-meal drinks. They noticed the train was hitting turns hard since leaving of Carlin. 2 beer bottles fell to the ground around one curve. On another, a woman was flung from her seat into the aisle. Everyone laughed. At 9:33 p.m., speeding toward Bridge Number 4 over the Humboldt River Gorge, Heckox saw a tumbleweed on the left rail of the track. That attracted my attention, as all weeds do. He testified at a 1941 civil trial, but when I struck the tumbleweed I felt a jar. Heckox braked, but it was too late. The city of San Francisco was derailing. The forward engines, propelled by momentum, slid off the rails but kept going across the bridge. Behind it, 5 cars decoupled. The Presidio, a 32-seat coffee shop kitchen car, Mission Dolores, a 72-seat dining car, Embarcadero, a lounge car, and Twin Peaks and Chinatown, both sleepers, plunged through the wooden track ties into the riverbed below. My first thought was, I wonder how many are going to be killed, Heckox later recalled. In the twisted wreckage were 24 dead and dying passengers and crew. Survivors crawled through the carnage, passing body parts torn apart by the impact. In the darkness, stewardess Thelma Ristvit, face covered in blood from a head wound, helped passengers until she passed out. It was too dark to see, so they began to set parts of the train on fire for light. Help was miles away. As soon as the train ground to a halt, Heckox started running for the closest town. Between his train and that town was nothing, no telephones, no people. When he got to Harney, the alarm was finally raised. Volunteers from town followed Heckox back to the crash site. Nearly all of the 170-plus people aboard were injured. One passenger, a doctor, triaged the wounded. It was a long night for them. The first rescue train wouldn't arrive until the next morning. With the rescue train came investigators from the Southern Pacific Railroad, local law enforcement, and the FBI. They poured over the site, which, unfortunately for agents, was unbelievably contaminated. Locals, of the helpful and looky-loo varieties, had walked over every inch of dirt. Some had taken away pieces of train and track as souvenirs. It was all hopelessly muddled. Sabotage was quickly discovered, though. In the stretch leading up to the bridge, a 30-foot section of rail had been tampered with. Its spikes were pulled out so the rail could be forced inward. The tumbleweed Heckox saw had been tied onto the rail to hide the gap. Brown paint coated the area, another attempt to disguise the vandalism. Dan O'Connell, the Southern Pacific's chief special agent out of San Francisco, said the job would have taken 90 pounds of tools carried from the highway over a mile away and several hours. There was a 4-hour window when no trains passed through during which to accomplish the deed. One investigator reenacted the task for the Chronicle in 1939. 4 heavy tools were necessary, they concluded, and whoever did it had to pull a 1,500-pound rail 5 inches from its position and spike it back down. If one man did it, he had a giant strength, the Chronicle wrote. Many investigators agreed. This was the work of at least 2 determined, able-bodied men, perhaps with some knowledge of rail operations. But instead of focusing on suspects with ties to the railroad, detectives went about rounding up the usual suspects, men made homeless by the Great Depression. They first sought a suspicious figure reportedly seen near the crash site in the hours before. Witnesses swore he had no ears. So an APB went out, and Bob LaDucer was found a day later. The 35-year-old had just 1 ear. He also had half a foot, which would have made the physical task of derailing a train nearly impossible. He proved he was 300 miles away the day of the accident, and police released him. Next, investigators were sent to every hobo jungle in California, Utah, and Nevada. The Associated Press reported they were also rounding up any transients in the Harney area. The strategy was likely driven in part by Southern Pacific President A.D. McDonald, who confidently told the media that one person of diseased brain wrecked his train. Lunatics do not have the capacity for sustained cooperation, such as this labor required, the Chronicle argued in an editorial. Madmen they must have been, mad in the judgment of normal-minded men. Yet there is an elusive quality in this deed that shows something besides madness at work. The key to the whole thing, a motive, is an enigma to this day. Terrorism, domestic or international, seems doubtful, as no group ever claimed responsibility for the act. More likely, it was the work of several men with a grudge against Southern Pacific or an individual on the train. There was some chatter at the time that it was actually a case of negligence, that the train had derailed due to its unsafe speed. But the FBI's discovery of clearly vandalized rails and tools hidden into the Humboldt River seems to refute this. In the end, over 93,000 people were interviewed by detectives. After the outbreak of World War II, the case was taken off active status. Other than a civil suit in the 1940s which yielded payouts for some injured passengers, the survivors of the city of San Francisco got no other justice for the crime. F.S. Foote Jr., who suffered a broken jaw and sternum, punctured lung, internal hemorrhaging, a concussion, and cracked ribs, was awarded $7,500, just enough to pay his hospital bills. Plus, he told newspapers, Southern Pacific gave him $5, which covered the additional fare he paid to upgrade to the city of San Francisco. While technically a refund of only the value of the unused portion of the ticket would be in order, we are refunding the full amount of the extra fare, due to the interruption to our service, said the letter that came with his $5 check. Trust that we shall have the pleasure of serving you in the future. The city of San Francisco has one more strange appearance in American history. In 1995, SP Trainline, a magazine from the Southern Pacific Historical and Technical Society, published a story called Tragedy at Harney, about the wreck of the Streamliner. A week later, Amtrak's Sunset Limited passenger train, traveling from Miami to Los Angeles, derailed in the Arizona desert. One crew member was killed. The scene looked eerily similar. A westbound train traveling through the desert at night deliberately sabotaged at the approach to a bridge, sending the train to the left into a riverbed. The FBI paid a visit to the SP Trainline's headquarters to question the author of Tragedy at Harvey. John R. Sr. told the Washington Post they asked to see the magazine's subscriber list and question him for 2 hours, although not as a suspect. One agent did ask as he left. Sr. mused, "By the way, where were you Sunday night?" But whether or not someone was inspired by the city of San Francisco remains a mystery. The Sunset Limited sabotage, too, has never been solved.
Number 4.
At 8:10 p.m. on December 6, 2014, 19-year-old Jessica Chambers was found burning next to her car, which was also on fire. She suffered burns on all of her body. A flammable liquid had been poured on her body, up her nose, and down her throat. Early the next morning, she died as a result of her injuries. Jessica's car keys were later found along a road near the crime scene. Her cell phone was examined by authorities in order to determine her movements on the day of her murder. They determined that she had spent the morning with two friends. She later went to her mother Lisa's house where she took a nap. Later in the afternoon, she left after receiving a text from someone. She told Lisa that she was going to get something to eat and clean out her car. At around 5:30 p.m., she went to a gas station about 1.5 miles from where her body was found. This was the last time she was seen alive. Location data from her phone showed that she went to nearby Batesville around 6 p.m., but returned to Cortland around 6:30 p.m. It is not known what she was doing in Batesville. About 15 minutes later, she called Lisa, who noticed that it was unusually quiet. At 7:30 p.m., she drove to the area where she was found about a half hour later. Authorities have yet to identify any suspects, and this case remains unsolved. In February 2016, Wynton Tellis was indicted on a capital murder charge in Jessica's murder. He had prior convictions for burglary, drug possession, and fleeing from police. He had also been arrested in 2015 for the murder of another woman, Ming Chen Xiao, whose credit cards he was caught using after her death. In this case, investigators connected him through cell phone and text records. He had known her for a few weeks, and they were allegedly romantically involved. He was also the last person who texted her before her death. Tellis changed his story about the day of Jessica's murder several times. Initially, he claimed to have only been with her during the morning. He claimed that he had gone to a store in Batesville around the time of her murder. Surveillance video showed Tellis at the store at 8:26 p.m., more than 15 minutes after the fire was discovered. However, location data from their cell phones showed that they were together until around 7:30 p.m. Tellis had traveled to and from Batesville at the same time as Jessica. When told of this, he changed his story, saying that he was with her until around 7 p.m. He claimed that a friend of his picked him up that night. However, when authorities questioned his friend, he said that he had gone to a football game in Nashville that night. His attendance there was confirmed, disproving Tellis's alibi. When confronted with the discrepancies, Tellis changed his story yet again. He said that Jessica picked him up that night and they went to a Taco Bell in Batesville. He claimed that they went back to his house and sat in his driveway, listening to music. He claimed that she left at 7 p.m. However, her cell phone's location data and surveillance video from a gas station next to his home indicated that she left at 7:30 p.m. and drove to the area where she was later found on fire. Authorities felt that it was extremely unlikely that Jessica encountered someone else in the 30 minutes between leaving Tellis's home and being discovered on fire. A sample of his DNA was taken, which was found to match DNA taken from her car keys. It was discovered that they were found along a path between the crime scene and his sister's home. Surveillance video showed a vehicle, believed to his sister's, stopping briefly at his home at 7:50 p.m. before driving towards the crime scene. Surveillance video also helped show that he had changed his clothes 3 times that day. Within an hour of Jessica's murder, Tellis had deleted all communications with her from his cell phone and stopped checking on her, even though they had been in constant contact in the days prior. The deleted messages showed that in the week prior to her murder, he repeatedly asked to have sex with her. Each time, she denied his request. The messages also showed that she had denied him sex 4 times on the day of her death. Prosecutors believe that, while in Tellis's driveway, he tried to have sex with Jessica. However, she resisted. They believe that he became enraged and suffocated her until she was unconscious. In order to distance himself from the crime, he then drove her car to the area where it was later found. He then ran on foot to his sister's home nearby, took her car, picked up gasoline from his home, returned to Jessica's car, and set it on fire, with her inside. Tellis's defense claimed that the person whom Jessica identified as Eric or Derek was her real killer. Tellis told police that a sex offender named Eric Holmes was stalking her. Residents claimed to have seen them together. However, he was ruled out by investigators based on his alibi and several interviews. Furthermore, doctors and other experts noted that it would have been difficult for her to say anything properly due to the injuries to her mouth and throat. Furthermore, she did not use her cell phone to talk to anyone named Eric or Derek in the 30 days prior to her murder. In October 2017, Tellis went on trial for Jessica's murder. Initially, the verdict was read as not guilty. However, it was discovered that the jury misunderstood the instructions, as many of them had voted for guilty. An hour later, they returned and said that they could not reach a verdict. A mistrial was declared. A new trial began on September 24, 2018 in a different county. However, during it, the new jury was also unable to reach a verdict, so a mistrial was again declared. Prosecutors are deciding whether to retry Tellis a third time for Jessica's murder. In February 2019, Tellis was indicted on murder charges in the murder of Ming Chen Xiao. He has been transported to Louisiana where he will soon face trial in her case. Sadly, Lisa passed away on October 29, 2021 at the age of 52, without being able to see justice happen for Jessica.
Number 5.
For more than 5 decades, the story of Penn State University graduate student Betsy Aardsma's unsolved murder has haunted the campus as an urban legend of sorts. But for those who have spent years trying to solve her case, they fear her story is becoming a faded memory. It was a quiet Thanksgiving week on campus in the fall of 1969 when 22-year-old Betsy was stabbed to death in the stacks of the Patty Library. Sunday marks 52 years, and her killer has never been caught. That year, the Holland, Michigan native had spent Thanksgiving Day in Hershey, Pennsylvania, with her boyfriend, but went back to campus early to finish a school assignment. The next day, on the afternoon of November 28, 1969, Betsy and her roommate Sharon walked from their dorm to the library. It was just after 4:45 p.m. when witnesses said they heard books falling. Betsy was found beneath a pile of books in aisle 51 of the stacks, and a library employee called campus security. She was transported to the student hospital on campus, where she was declared dead at 5:19 p.m. At the time, Mike Simmers was a young trooper with the Pennsylvania State Police working undercover on the Penn State campus while attending college classes. He told Dateline that he normally dealt with drug busts and crowd control during the anti-Vietnam War protests on campus, so this call was something he had never experienced. When I got the call that day, it was for a medical emergency, Simmers told Dateline. It was believed she had fainted or had a seizure. I had no idea it was murder. No one did. Simmers told Dateline that he remembers following campus security into the library, back to the dimly lit stacks where several books were scattered on the floor, stained just a little with an unknown liquid. But there was no body to be found. They told me the body had already been transported to the hospital on campus, Simmers said. It was all very strange. The area was being cleaned up. Students were milling about. He made his way to the hospital, where he discovered that the student, identified as Betsy Aardsma, had not only died from her injuries, but that her death was a homicide. I knew I needed to call in backup, Simmers said. This was over my head. In the briefing from the doctor, Simmers found out that Betsy had been stabbed once in her left breast. The wound, which was 1 inch wide and 3 inches deep, hit her pulmonary artery. Blood quickly entered her lungs, which kept her from screaming. That also accounted for the lack of blood on aisle 51, the doctor had told Simmers, which was also confirmed by the autopsy a few days later. Simmers immediately called the state police barracks located about 8 miles away from campus, and they went back to the library. We went back over to the library, he said, back to what we now know was a crime scene. But when they arrived, nothing was left intact. The books had been reshelved, and the floors had been mopped. After the area had been straightened up, students were allowed to walk through the area, and no one was asked to stick around to answer questions. Simmers told Dateline that through the investigation, witnesses were eventually questioned, but most could only recollect hearing books falling. A sketch was created from a description given by one of the witnesses who said they saw a man running away, but a suspect has never been named, Simmers said. We had a couple of people who we believe could be the suspect, Simmers said, but there was never enough evidence to make any arrests. Simmers said that state police brought in an expert to use an ultraviolet blacklight to detect bodily fluids in the area Betsy had been found. Aisle 51 lit up. It was covered in semen, Simmers said, but most samples appeared to be days old, or even older. He added that the stacks were a place where porn magazines were stashed, and people would meet up for secret rendezvous. Other evidence collected was a spray of tiny blood droplets that law enforcement said looked like someone was flicking their hands. It matched Betsy's blood type, but Simmers said DNA technology was not available at that time, and there wasn't sufficient evidence collected to solve the case. Simmers told Dateline he was on case for months, thanks to his knowledge of the campus and ability to locate and bring in a student for questioning. He added that between 30 and 40 state troopers worked the case, interviewing hundreds of students and following leads around the country, including Pennsylvania and Betsy's home state of Michigan. There are so many people who work this case, doing everything they can do, Simmers said. But it was a perfect storm, and we just couldn't solve her case. Simmers told Dateline there are many theories floating around about what could have happened to Betsy, but he believes it was someone who was close to her.